Welcome. Since 2008, the IPO Education Foundation Board of Directors has honored individuals in the IP community for their commitment to invention and innovation with the Distinguished IP Professional and IP Champion Awards. Past recipients include the Honorable Alan Laurie, the Honorable Pauline Newman, the Honorable Paul Michel, David Pappas, the Honorable James Holderman, Doug Henderson, the Honorable Richard Lynn, Herb Walmsley, Seth Waxman, the Honorable Sue Robinson, Joe Kiani, and Andre Yanku. It is my privilege to present this year's award to the Honorable Kathleen O'Malley. Judge O'Malley was appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit by President Barack Obama in 2010. Prior to her elevation to the Federal Circuit, Judge O'Malley was appointed to the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio by President Bill Clinton in 1994.
It goes beyond what I do just as a judge, just in my day-to-day job. I think it has more to do with the fact that I'm willing to fight the fight out in the public domain.
What judges can do in intellectual property is to provide really good reasons for their decisions and then provide certainty for people when they're going and working out what their intellectual property rights are. Kate is a professional in what she does. She's an outstanding judge. She's committed to being a judge, and she lives and breathes IP.
She is not satisfied until she gets to the very bottom of an issue, the what, the why, and the how. And that's reflected in all of her judicial work product, and that's reflected in all of her contributions off the bench to the patent profession.
She leads simply by the force of her intellect and logic and her willingness to share her thinking with the larger legal community. Many judges are sometimes reluctant to speak beyond the written words of their opinions, but Judge O'Malley is willing to share her view of the way the law is and the way the law should be with the larger IP community.
I think the belief is, and this goes back to the Founding Fathers, that by giving someone something that they can benefit from for their creative ideas, that it incentivizes them to act. So it was intended to be a vehicle so that individuals whose only real asset was their creativity or their brain could actually make a living out of being creative and helping the country that way.
Judge O'Malley is extraordinarily smart, principled, and has a fundamental understanding of the IP system. And combining that with her incredible writing abilities, she is routinely able to take very complex issues and make them understandable.
There aren't idle points that she makes. There aren't facts that just don't belong there in the end. In the end, it's her work product is, if you will, it's kind of like an assembly of a very complex Lego structure that fits together very well and is, very well thought out. There's not a lot of excess that's contained in her writings.
Judge O'Malley is a distinguished IP professional in my mind because she has been a consistent and an articulate voice for a well-functioning IP system throughout her professional career. Her judicial opinions on some of the most difficult and controversial issues of the day in IP law are invariably articulate, persuasive, and really fearless.
I think when you look at what she's contributed to intellectual property law, and you look at what she's contributed not only in her role on the court, but as an IP thought leader, it really sets her apart from most other people I know in this field.
If you go to a Kate judgment, you can find why she decided. Not in a sort of trying to extract it from a cloud of words, but in a clear couple of sentences. when she set the stage and said what it's all about. It's a very special ability.
Well, I think one of the most important things that you can do when you're issuing a judgment and opinion is to make sure that what you are saying is clear and you are responsive to the arguments that the parties have made. So you don't want anyone walking away wondering how you got where you got.
I think the most important part of her legacy is that she embodies everything you want in a federal judge. And she is always fair. She brings no agenda to the case. And you know when you've tried a case before her or had an appeal argument before that you will be treated fairly.
The IPO Education Foundation Board of Directors feels Judge O'Malley is richly deserving of this award. Congratulations for your extraordinary leadership in the intellectual property community. And now, Henry Hadad, IPO's immediate past president and a member of the IPO Education Foundation Board, will lead a discussion with Judge O'Malley about her time on the bench.
Thanks, Manny, and good evening, everyone. I'm privileged to be here tonight with Judge Kathleen O'Malley, who's the honoree of the Distinguished IP Professional Award. Congratulations, Judge O'Malley.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you very much also for participating in this fireside chat. So here's my first question. You've dedicated your life to public service and have had an extraordinary legal career, from private practice to the Ohio AG's office to the bench for over 25 years. Were there any experiences in your childhood or as a student which led you down this road? And how did your experiences as a clerk for the Sixth Circuit influence your decision?
To answer that question, I do need to say one thing, and that is that because of this COVID world that we're in, we're filming this well before the day of, which means that everyone else just saw a video that I have not had the opportunity to view. So I think that if I were doing this in real time, I'd either be crying or laughing or at least distracted. So I don't want anyone to think that I wouldn't react or thank people for what they said or give some people a hard time for what they said, but I just am not going to have that opportunity this time. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that I'm not being cold. It's that I haven't had the opportunity to have that emotional video played. But in answer to your question, I think like all people that there's many things in our childhood, mine, not the least of which is my parents, who I've talked about many, many times, but they were extraordinarily dedicated to education. And I had three older brothers. They never gave me the idea that I had any fewer expectations of me than they had of my older brothers. They always insisted on excellence. They were both scientists. My mom was a chemist. My dad was a chemical engineer. I think my mom was a double major in chemistry and classical languages. I didn't do any of those things, but their dedication to education was very important to me. I think a lot of people have heard the story that I often tell, though, about the time when I was about 13 years old and my older brother, Kevin, lent me the book Gideon's Trumpet to read on the beach. And it was the story of Earl Wayne Gideon, who wrote a letter to the Supreme Court questioning whether it was appropriate for him to be convicted of a crime and sentenced to prison when he didn't have a lawyer, only because he couldn't afford one. And the Supreme Court was waiting for such a case to come before it. They treated his letter as a petition for cert, and the rest is history. We now have Gideon versus Wainwright, and everyone who is charged with a felony is entitled to counsel at state and federal level. And that inspired me to want to be a federal judge, not just a lawyer, not just a judge, but a federal judge. My parents told me it was not going to happen. It wasn't likely, that we didn't have the connections. It was those kinds of things just didn't happen to people from our kinds of backgrounds. And lo and behold, it ultimately did. But that idea never left me. And once I did become a lawyer, I had the privilege to clerk for Judge Nathaniel Jones on the Sixth Circuit. And his inspiration was powerful. He was an icon of the civil rights movement. He was one of the first to do everything. He was the first U.S. attorney in Ohio that was Black. He was the first, one of the first African Americans on a circuit court in the United States. He just strove always to make his own history and to make history for the rest of the world. And that was a great example for me.
Thanks, Judge O'Malley. You know, hearing you speak about your childhood, and I have four kids, 3 sons, and my youngest is a daughter. I see a lot of reasons why you achieved what you achieved. My daughter seems capable of anything with having 3 older brothers and the pressure they put on her. But turning to, I mean, how amazing at such a young age, knowing you wanted to be a judge. And then at a relatively young age, you become a United States District Court judge for the Northern District of Ohio. So what were some of the most challenging things about becoming a judge at that point in your career?
One of the most challenging things about becoming a judge at that point was that I was so young. Even though men had gone on the bench at even younger ages, for some reason, people were so shocked that a woman could possibly get on the bench at such a young age. So there were some suspicions about whether I was really qualified, why I was chosen. Was I just chosen because I was a woman? You know, the typical suspicions. And so I think that I had to prove myself. I had to prove myself more, not just because I was a woman, but because I was a young woman. And so that was challenging. One of the most challenging things was the first day I was in the courtroom and it was my turn to pound the gavel. I realized that I couldn't bring myself to do it without laughing because I was young. I never could believe I was going to get there. So I had to ask my courtroom deputy to do it. And 16 years later, the day I was leaving the district court bench, I finally banged the gavel for the first time. Because that temptation to laugh was always going to be with me if I did it myself. But beyond that, the hardest part about being a district court judge for me was sentencings. It's not because I couldn't assess the people in front of me and the crimes they committed and try to determine what a fair sentence should be, but it's because I became a judge during the era of sentencing guidelines when they were mandatory. And I had to impose so many sentences that I thought were completely unfair, either because they were way, way too harsh, especially with respect to drug crimes, or because I thought they were way too lenient, as with respect to a lot of white collar crimes. So what I found to be most frustrating and what kept me up at night was knowing I was going to have to put mostly young minority men in jail for sometimes the rest of their lives for crimes that, given their upbringing, they probably had no chance of not committing or not being in a position to commit. And they almost all were just drug related, not violence, nothing like that. It was just drugs. And in those cases, I thought the sentences were way too harsh. I didn't mind sentencing harshly when there was a lot of violence involved. And I had some pretty severe cases, but I just felt that the sentencing guidelines, which I lived with for the vast portion of my career as a mandatory obligation, were in many ways just skewed on both ends of the spectrum.
You know, as someone who's practiced his entire career in civil law, you know, when I think of the pressures we're under, I think they're really nothing in comparison to those who practice criminal law on a regular basis. So thank you for sharing that. But as you mentioned, you did have a tremendous tenure, 16 years on the federal trial court bench.
and then you were elevated in 2010 to the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. So there you were, sort of running your own court for 16 years, and now suddenly you're now part of 3-member panels most of the time, making judgments. What was the adjustment there?
It was actually a big adjustment. I mean, first, as you said, I didn't have my own courtroom. Like, what do you mean I have to share this courtroom with other people? I mean, I had my own courtroom for my own uses whenever I needed it. I also, I got pretty used to making my own decisions and sometimes having to make them very quickly. And, yes, the Sixth Circuit might disagree with me sometimes, but that was their job, and mine was to make my decisions. You come on the Federal Circuit and you realize that you have to get at least one other person to agree with you, and not just agree with what your decision is, but how you express it. And that was a bit of a shock. It was quite an adjustment to understand that you had to compromise not only on what the outcome of certain cases would be, but how you would phrase what the outcome of certain cases would be. So that was a big adjustment. But there was also, some great bonuses in the adjustment. Number one is I didn't really get to see my colleagues at the district court very often. We would have meetings once a month, and sometimes didn't always happen once a month, but we would try to meet, but there were not regular opportunities for us to meet and to interact. The judges here are all in the same courthouse. We have lunches once a week. We interact all the time. Obviously, we have to interact when we're on panels or on en bancs. So that was a bonus. The extra law clerks was a bonus. And the opportunity to really dig in to complex legal issues. I mean, it's not that you don't get complex legal issues as a district court judge. It's just that you don't have the luxury of spending the time that you can as a Court of Appeals judge. So while there were certain, difficult adjustments, there were some real pleasant surprises.
So I had the privilege of attending your portrait unveiling earlier this year, just before the shutdown occurred. And I was completely moved by the number of former clerks who attended and their heartfelt tributes to you. What has it meant to you to be a mentor and a guide to the next generation of legal professionals?
Having my law clerks around me has been the best part of this whole job, both jobs. I had to sort of ease my way into being a mentor, though, because when I took the bench, my law clerks weren't that much younger than I was. In fact, one of them was almost my age. And so it was more like we were friends and growing into the job together. But obviously, as the years went on, I kept getting older, and they didn't get any older. They were, these young people coming in, and they keep me challenged. They teach me about music and about restaurants and about fashion, what not to wear, what not to say. I once dropped a footnote where I thought I was quoting Shakespeare, and I was told it was absolutely not appropriate because it had some double meaning that I had no idea about. So thank goodness they were there to stop me. But I do think I have grown into that part of the job, and it's the part that I'm really enjoying. COVID has been difficult because I can't be in chambers with them. I can't have those casual moments where we just stop in the hall, those water cooler moments. But we've been trying to keep it up. We have Zooms a couple times a week. In non-court weeks, in court week, we have Zooms virtually every day. And I try to talk about things other than cases during those Zooms. So we get to know each other, and they can ask things about, things I've experienced or about my life or about my view of things, and I can ask their view. So I'm trying to keep the experience as good as possible for them. And I think in some ways, some of those clerks feel like they might be getting more one-on-one time with me because I have no distractions when I'm on those Zoom calls. But I love mentoring my law clerks.
I can tell. Speaking of Zoom, you and I are on Zoom right now. How have remote hearings been going so far for the court?
We were lucky. I mean, as you mentioned my portrait ceremony, I was especially lucky because had I known then what I realized the world should have known or the US should have known then, I don't know that I would have had it. I mean, I'm sure I wouldn't have had it. It was March 6th. So it was right under the wire. And many people say to me, it's the last time that they did anything normal, you know, that they were involved with a crowd, or that they were out and about. And so we locked down just after that. But the good news for the court was that portrait ceremony, which was only days before the lockdown, was a Friday of court week, which meant we had that time to adjust and be ready by the beginning of April court week, and to do hearings and to do them virtually. We didn't go to cameras at the time. We didn't have the capability, and Zoom wasn't as sophisticated as it is now, or I guess we're starting to use this like Kleenex, but you know what I mean? These platforms were not as sophisticated as they are now. And then we were also concerned about, there were still rules about cameras in the courtroom, and we didn't know what that meant in terms of cameras in our respective homes. So we started doing it by telephone, and we were so surprised at how well they went that we continued the process, and that we then were asked by the Supreme Court to give them our script in terms of how we do these things. And they've sort of patterned after us by doing theirs by phone. We don't, of course, have a system where we put all our pictures up where everybody can see them on C-SPAN, but we've been really pleased at the way we've been moving the docket, moving cases quickly, turning opinions around, and I think Chief Judge Prost has been thrilled.
So, okay, turning to further work by the court, your written opinions are very notable to me, at least. They're very clearly written. They show a commitment to the rule of law and a fairness to the parties before the court. So what, in your view, is the role of a judge in deciding cases, and how does that manifest itself in your written opinions?
I think the role of the judge is to decide the case before you, and to let the parties know exactly why you decided the case the way you did. I used to have debates with my law clerks at the district court who would say, well, we don't really need to write much on this. It was just a sentencing debate, or it was just a pro se plaintiff who wanted to file something. And I said, everybody, especially the pro se plaintiffs, needs to know, or someone who's being sentenced needs to know why it's happening. And so I said, we write for the parties. We don't write for the Court of Appeals. I don't write for the lawyers. I write for the parties. And so you need to try to be clear if you want the parties to understand you. And so that's always been sort of my vision. I'm also a conservative jurist, and I don't mean that in the political sense. I mean that, I tend to address the issues that are truly presented. I try to not write about things that aren't necessary to the decision, or to try to streamline and make it clear what is necessary to the decision. So, and I tend to be pretty careful about statutory interpretation. So I consider myself a conservative judge with the small c, conservative.
So related to that, you've been outspoken about the importance of judicial independence, particularly in the context of separation of powers. These days, it seems like appointments to the federal bench have become somewhat politicized. Has that impacted the role of judges?
I think so. I mean, I do think that, and it's not just the most recent days, it's been happening now for probably the last 8 to 10 years, I think, where attacks on the judiciary have escalated. It's gotten much worse recently, but judges are characterized as a Reagan judge, as a Obama judge, as a Clinton judge, as a Trump judge, and that's obviously problematic. And our political elected officials are denigrating judges in public, denigrating the court in public. And I do think that, at least most recently, the court itself has become politicized in the sense that it's almost been made to be a running mate of the particular candidate that's running. And we all know that the president is going to have the right to appoint someone that he or she believes is of their like mind, but to hold the court out as a political animal And to say that the court is, I'm making this court so that they will decide certain cases certain ways, I think puts the court at great risk, puts the entire judiciary at great risk. People have to believe and to have faith in the judiciary if the judiciary is going to succeed as an independent branch. It's all about public perception. I frankly feel very sorry for the Supreme Court right now because of the way it's been politicized. I think their challenge is going to be a difficult one, to make sure that they maintain the respect of not just some of the people in the United States, but of everybody in the United States and of the world. And I believe that they're up to the challenge, but I think it's a huge challenge. And the judiciary has got to try to prove to the public that it does have that judgment that the Federalists mentioned when they said we don't have the power of the purse, we don't have the power of the sword, but we do, all we have is judgment. And so we're going to have to try to work even harder to make it clear to the public that we do have legitimate and valued judgments.
Thanks, Judge O'Malley. We are at the IPO Education Foundation dinner this evening, so we probably should turn to the topic of intellectual property. So you have been a thought leader and a frequent speaker to global audiences about the role of intellectual property in driving innovation, investment, and job creation globally. What drives your passion for promoting robust IP systems globally? And do you have any examples of experiences where countries are adopting more predictable and fair systems?
I do think that, I mean, as you know, Henry, this is a big issue for me, and not just the importance of IP to our economy, but I've gone back through history and studied the history of the IP clause in the Constitution. What was the motivation behind it? How did we try to use intellectual property rights to kickstart the economy and to make the best and the brightest in our country willing to be creative and to help move our economy forward at a time when it was very important that our economy develop, or we were at risk of being of losing our independence. And Madison especially, but our founders understood that it was a strong, robust economy that was going to protect us, even from a national security standpoint, and that the best way to have a strong, robust economy was to give people the ability to succeed and to understand that if they put effort into being creative, that there would be some return, there would be some ability to protect their creative visions. And so I think that is, it's so important, and I don't think it's any less important today. And I believe that over time, we've started to lose sight of that vision. We've started to view intellectual property as a burden rather than something that drives our economy and is in part, and it is the engine of our future. And I think we need to get back to that. I think, one of the reasons I love this organization is that Education Foundation, one of its missions is to try to put more inventors into the pipeline. And that, getting more young people to be involved in STEM and to understand why inventing is important and why intellectual property rights are important, I think is one of the most important things that we all as professionals can do. And so that's why I love your programs. I love watching the young videos every year from the young inventors. And I know that the PTO has put together a similar program to try to encourage more women, minorities, and it's a pipeline program just like yours. And that's what we all have to focus on.
So in that vein, turning closer to home, U.S. IP system has been particularly dynamic during your tenure at the CAFC. Congress has enacted legislation. The Supreme Court has been very active in this area. What is your current feeling about the state of IP law in the US today? And what advice can you give members of the audience who want to improve the system?
Well, I think that we have gone from being sort of the envy of the world in terms of our IP system to the point where I think around the world, at least what I hear in my travels or now in my virtual travels, is that they believe that we have lost sight of what is important and that we are making a lot of mistakes in terms of our unwillingness to protect appropriate intellectual property. I don't like it when people say, oh, someone's patent friendly or unpatent friendly. You have to be friendly to well done, well written, thoughtful, original patents. But that doesn't mean that you don't understand that some patents are not valuable. And so I think we've gotten a little bit too much to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We had a lot of abuse in our patent system. And instead of trying to target that abuse, I think we targeted the system as a whole. And I think the greatest piece of advice I can give is that we need to try to clean up some things. I think that it's worthy of Congress looking at these issues. I hope that they will actually do something. I root for Senators Coons and Tillis all the time and hope that they will be able to have a few fixes that will clarify where the law should be. I'm not going to go into detail about what those should be. That's for Congress to decide, but you all know what they are.
Judge O'Malley, thank you so much for your time today during this fireside chat, and congratulations again on receiving the Distinguished IP Professional Award. Your dedication to public service and the rule of law has been inspiring to me and the members of this audience. Any final words?
Well, Henry, I do want to thank you and the entire organization. This was such an honor, and I remember when you reached out to me to tell me that I was going to be told about this. I was so shocked. I really couldn't believe it, and I'm thrilled. I wish we could all be there in person to celebrate it, but I understand why we can't. But I just want you to know that because of the way I believe this organization is dedicated to working together to solve IP problems, even though you have so many different representatives in your organization. And I believe that the fact that this organization is dedicated to education and expanding the pool of inventors makes this award even more special to me.
Thanks again, Judge O'Malley, and hope everyone enjoys the rest of the event.
Thank you.